The grand hall glittered with golden chandeliers, crystal glasses catching every gleam of the afternoon sun. Rows of white chairs lined the aisle, each adorned with delicate silk ribbons, and a scent of fresh roses filled the air. Everything screamed wealth, power, and perfection. Yet, behind this veneer of celebration lurked a cruel plan, a trap designed to humiliate a woman who had once been loved but now became the target of spite. Monique Jefferson, a striking black woman with deep cocoa skin, stood silently at the entrance of the hall. Her eyes, dark and unwavering, scanned the room. Even after all these years, the memories of betrayal cut deep, but she was determined to carry herself with grace. Her hair, a cascade of tight, lustrous curls, framed a face that held both vulnerability and the quiet strength of someone who had endured too much. She wore a tailored emerald green dress that hugged her form without arrogance, a color that spoke of resilience and calm authority. A week ago, she had received the wedding invitation. The elegant card bore golden letters spelling out a name she had once held close to her heart, Derrick Reynolds. He had invited her to his wedding, not out of friendship, but with the intention of humiliating her. Derrick, now a successful businessman with sharp suits and a perfectly groomed image, thrived on social dominance. The man who had once promised forever was now plotting to see her reduced to nothing before his new bride, a young socialite who looked like she had stepped out of a magazine cover. The whispers started the moment she stepped through the hall doors. Guests noticed her immediately. Some recognized the beauty and dignity in her posture, while others sneered, thinking of her as an intruder in this pristine world. Monique felt a tightness in her chest but refused to show it. She had learned long ago that vulnerability could be exploited, and she would not give Derrick that satisfaction, not here, not now. Meanwhile, Derrick's pride flared as he observed her from across the room. His tall frame, sharp jawline, and piercing blue eyes exuded confidence, but his smirk betrayed his arrogance. He had invited her precisely to see her reaction, to make a statement to everyone in the room. The woman he once loved was beneath him, or so he thought. He had arranged it perfectly, the seating, the whispers, even the timing of her arrival, all choreographed to deliver maximum embarrassment. The guests were oblivious to the tension that charged the air like static electricity. They chatted politely, sipping champagne, while Monique's calm gaze swept over them. She noticed subtle gestures, the raised eyebrows, the quick glances, and yet, she did not flinch. She had survived far worse than whispers at a wedding, and she would not be reduced to a spectacle today. Derrick approached, his voice smooth, practiced, dripping with condescension. "Monique," he said, his tone a mix of forced warmth and barely concealed ridicule. "I'm surprised you came." Monique's lips curved into a measured smile, one that did not reveal the storm brewing behind her eyes. "I came to witness happiness, Derrick," she replied softly, her words carrying a quiet weight that seemed to hover in the air like an unspoken challenge. The bride, a tall blonde with icy blue eyes, looked at Monique with a mix of curiosity and thinly veiled disdain. She whispered something to Derrick, whose smirk widened, assuming her presence would shatter the elegance of the day. But Monique's calm demeanor, the way she carried herself, seemed to resist their narrative, and for a moment, the room held its collective breath. As the ceremony began, Monique took her seat at the back, away from the aisle but in full view. Every detail, the chandeliers, the flowers, the music, was designed to reflect Derrick's wealth and success, yet each element felt hollow compared to the weight of Monique's presence. She did not need wealth to command attention, she carried a story, a life, and an unyielding dignity that money could never buy. The ceremony moved forward, but the tension was palpable. Derrick tried to maintain his usual composure, but he could not ignore the fact that Monique's eyes were locked on him, steady and unflinching. She remembered the nights he had belittled her, the empty promises, the social humiliations he had inflicted. Every slight he had ever cast her way was catalogued in her mind, but instead of anger, it fueled a plan, a quiet, meticulous design that would one day turn the tables. The officiant spoke words of love and commitment, yet Derrick could not help but glance nervously toward Monique, seeking the reaction he had anticipated. What he did not know was that Monique had spent years building a life far beyond his reach. She had climbed, she had struggled, and she had risen while maintaining integrity where he had chosen arrogance. As vows were exchanged, Derrick's new bride glanced at Monique once more, a flicker of unease passing across her face. Something about Monique's presence, her poise, her very being, unsettled the carefully constructed fantasy of perfection that Derrick had built around himself. And then it happened, the moment that no one in the hall would forget. Monique rose from her seat, slowly, deliberately. A hush fell over the room. She walked down the aisle with steady steps, each one echoing like a heartbeat of justice. Her eyes never left Derrick's, and her expression was unreadable, a mask perfected over years of trials. She reached the front, paused, and looked at the guests, her voice cutting through the murmur like a bell. "I am here not to witness humiliation," she said, her words clear and commanding. "I am here to witness truth." Gasps filled the hall. Derrick's face paled. His bride's smile faltered. The whispers turned into confused murmurs. Monique continued, her voice unwavering. "Those who think power comes from wealth alone are mistaken. True power comes from dignity, resilience, and the courage to rise above injustice. Today, I stand not as someone defeated, but as someone who has overcome. And I will not be a footnote in anyone's story." The room was silent, the music ceased mid-note, and all eyes were on her. For the first time that afternoon, Derrick's smirk vanished. He realized that his plan to humiliate her had backfired in the most public way possible. Monique took a deep breath, ready to reveal the next part of her plan, a revelation that would shock everyone in the room. But before she could speak again, the doors behind the hall swung open, and a figure appeared, someone who would change the course of the evening and leave everyone gasping in disbelief. And with that, part 1 ends, leaving the wedding hall, and the viewers, on the edge of their seats. Who was at the door? What revelation awaited Derrick and his bride? The grand hall glittered like a palace. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto the polished marble floors, bouncing off every golden accent. Guests in designer gowns and sharp tuxedos murmured behind their champagne flutes, their laughter hollow, rehearsed. Derrick Albright, the groom, moved with the confidence of someone who believed he had orchestrated the perfect spectacle. Every detail had been meticulously planned, the flowers, the seating arrangement, the string quartet. But there was one detail he had underestimated, the storm that had just walked through the towering doors. Monique Washington stood at the threshold, a quiet, unassuming presence that immediately demanded attention. She was the picture of composed elegance, a vision in a deep emerald green gown that hugged her tall, athletic frame. Her dark chocolate skin seemed to glow under the chandelier lights, and her natural afro framed her face in a halo of defiance. She carried no purse, no flamboyant accessories, just herself, her dignity, and a quiet fire that no wealth or social standing could extinguish. The room fell into a sudden, almost tangible silence. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The quartet hesitated, strings trembling. Derrick's smile faltered, the confident gleam in his eyes replaced by a flash of disbelief. He had invited her as a mere formality, a way to show that he could summon his past humiliation and twist it into public entertainment. He hadn't anticipated that Monique's presence would command the room, rather than shrink beneath it. Monique's entrance was more than a walk down the aisle of society's expectations, it was a statement. She didn't rush, didn't bow, didn't apologize. She simply moved, slow and deliberate, scanning the crowd with eyes that missed nothing. Every whisper, every glance, every judgmental smirk bounced off her like water off polished stone. She was untouchable, not in arrogance, but in absolute self-possession. Derrick shifted uneasily. His fiancée, Vanessa, a blonde socialite with an expression permanently etched in haughty amusement, caught sight of Monique and stiffened. Her perfectly manicured hands gripped the bouquet a fraction too tightly. She had expected an inconsequential, meek ex-wife who would shuffle in, look humbled, and provide amusement for the elite. Instead, Vanessa saw confidence, a poised, radiant confidence that made her own air of superiority look fragile and forced. The first whispers rippled across the hall. Is that Monique Washington? The woman he left for a younger, wealthier bride? She looks powerful. Derrick cleared his throat, attempting to reassert control. Monique, he said, his voice tight. I didn't expect you to attend. Monique smiled faintly, polite but sharp. I wouldn't miss it, Derrick, she replied, her tone steady. After all, it's not every day you get to witness someone so confident in their past mistakes. The room stiffened. Gasps mingled with murmurs. A few guests smirked nervously, unsure if they were witnessing a polite greeting or the calm before a storm. Derrick's hand trembled slightly as he adjusted his cufflinks. The years of planning, the perfect image of control, every carefully constructed illusion, was beginning to crumble. Monique's strategy was simple: she would not react hastily. She would observe, gather intelligence, and let the tension build. For months, she had prepared herself for this moment, not in anger, but in foresight. She had meticulously documented her life since Derrick had left her, her professional achievements, the businesses she had launched, the mentorship programs she had founded, and her increasing influence in philanthropic circles. Each accomplishment was a quiet counterweight to the humiliation she had endured. As Monique took her place near the back of the room, she noticed Derrick's old friends, those who had once mocked her behind closed doors, exchanging anxious glances. Their smirks were gone, replaced with unease. It was clear that the social hierarchy Derrick had relied upon was cracking. He might have been the groom, the man with wealth, but Monique carried an authority that could not be bought or inherited. The ceremony began, but the air was charged with silent tension. Every vow Derrick recited sounded hollow, a thin veil over his growing discomfort. Vanessa, trying to maintain composure, kept her gaze forward, but even she couldn't ignore the undercurrent of anticipation rolling through the crowd. Whispers about Monique's presence had already begun to spread, the social fabric Derrick had relied on now fraying thread by thread. Monique, however, stayed silent. She didn't need to speak to make her presence felt. Her eyes scanned the room, noting subtle reactions, the tightened jaws, the involuntary foot taps, the eyes darting toward her as if seeking validation of their own insecurities. She saw the fear flicker in Derrick's gaze, a fear not of her as a person, but of her power. After the vows, the reception began. Champagne flowed freely, but the mood remained tense. Monique navigated the room with elegance, offering polite smiles without lowering herself to the superficial chatter that had once defined her social circles. She conversed with a few influential guests, subtly reminding them of her accomplishments and the positive impact she had made in the community. Meanwhile, Derrick grew increasingly desperate. He had intended to humiliate her subtly, using the setting as a stage for ridicule. Yet every attempt he made, every joke aimed at her past, every condescending glance, was deflected effortlessly. Monique's calm presence transformed every potential insult into a mirror, reflecting his insecurity back to him. Then came the moment Derrick had not anticipated, the speeches. His father, a stern man with a reputation for ruthless business dealings, rose to offer a toast. He began speaking about family legacy, wealth, and the importance of choosing the right partner. But as his gaze landed on Monique, his words faltered. For the first time, he hesitated, the veneer of authority cracking ever so slightly. Monique noticed, of course. She allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile. Timing, she had learned, was everything. Patience and observation were her weapons. She didn't need to confront him yet, the room itself was conspiring to dismantle his carefully curated image. As the night wore on, tensions escalated. Derrick's attempts at control grew more frantic, an ill-timed joke, a forced laugh, a glance too sharp. Each misstep was magnified in the collective consciousness of the guests. Social media posts began circulating almost instantly. Someone had discreetly captured Monique's entrance on video. Comments ranged from admiration to incredulity. Who is she? She owns that room. Derrick looks like he's about to implode. But the real turning point came near the end of the night. As the couple prepared to cut the wedding cake, Derrick's father decided to publicly commend the groom for showing growth in his choice of partner. Monique, sensing an opening, moved closer. Her gaze met Derrick's, and without a word, she communicated a silent truth: the humiliation he had planned had backfired spectacularly. Derrick faltered, knife in hand, his public composure slipping. The cameras caught every tremor, every flash of uncertainty. Monique, meanwhile, remained the epitome of grace and control. She didn't need to speak, her presence alone was a masterclass in reclaiming power. Then, the moment everyone had been waiting for, the cliffhanger that would leave whispers circulating for weeks. Monique, moving with quiet precision, approached the microphone left near the cake. Her voice was calm, measured, and filled with authority. "Tonight," she began, her words cutting through the ambient chatter like a blade, "we've witnessed a lot of things: love, wealth, and celebration. But most importantly, we've witnessed the truth, that dignity, self-respect, and achievement cannot be overshadowed by wealth or social standing alone." Gasps rippled through the room. Derrick's face turned pale. Vanessa's smile faltered. The room fell into an uneasy silence, hanging on Monique's every word. "And sometimes," Monique continued, "people invite the past into their celebrations thinking it will embarrass those they've wronged. But the past has a way of revealing strength you never realized you had. And tonight, the truth is clear: power isn't given, it's claimed, and it's claimed by those who refuse to let humiliation define them." She paused. The tension was unbearable, the entire hall waiting. And then, with a calm that belied the storm she had just unleashed, she stepped back. Every eye was on Derrick. His carefully constructed world had shifted. The whispers were deafening. The social media posts already trending, capturing every second of her calm defiance, every ounce of dignity she had reclaimed. And in that moment, it was clear: Monique Washington had not just survived the night, she had rewritten it entirely. The cliffhanger that hung in the air was simple yet devastating: what would Derrick do next? How far would he go to regain control? And more importantly, what steps would Monique take to ensure that her power, and her dignity, remained unassailable? The answers would not come immediately. The night was over, but the war had only just begun. The morning after the wedding was unusually quiet. The Albright estate, usually buzzing with staff, contractors, and constant activity, was eerily still. Derrick Albright had retreated to his private study, the door firmly closed, hiding his humiliation from anyone daring enough to peek. But inside, he was a storm of fury and disbelief. Derrick had spent years crafting a public persona of success, sophistication, and control, and yet, one woman had undone it all in the span of a single evening. Monique Washington, the very person he had once dismissed, underestimated, and left behind, had returned not as a submissive ex-wife, but as a force that shattered his image. He paced the room, fists clenched, heart pounding, replaying the scene over and over in his mind. Her words, their calm precision, the authority, the subtle yet unmistakable public shaming, played like a taunting echo. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't yelled. And yet, she had completely controlled the room. Derrick felt powerless in a way he had never felt before. Vanessa, his new bride, tried to maintain her air of elegance, but even her practiced poise couldn't mask the insecurity spreading beneath. She had married Derrick for wealth and social standing, believing that he controlled the world. But now, she realized that his control was a fragile illusion, one that could crumble at the entrance of a single dignified woman. Meanwhile, Monique had returned home to her modest but warm apartment. Her reflection in the mirror told her she had won a significant first battle, but she knew the war was far from over. She carefully removed her earrings, letting her afro fall freely around her shoulders, and sat down to plan her next steps. Strategy was her ally. Patience, her weapon. Monique's mind raced as she reviewed the social media frenzy from the night before. Videos of her entrance, her calm defiance, and her speech were going viral. Comments ranged from admiration to outrage, from praise for her poise to whispers of jealousy and disbelief. This was exactly the momentum she needed, but she knew it would draw attention from Derrick and his allies, who would stop at nothing to reclaim their perceived power. By mid-morning, Derrick had convened an emergency meeting with his inner circle, friends, business partners, and the wedding planners who had helped him craft the public spectacle he now regretted. "We need to contain this," Derrick barked, slamming his fist on the mahogany table. "That woman humiliated me in front of the entire social scene. In front of everyone. I don't care how, she needs to be controlled, discredited, or removed from the narrative." His advisors exchanged nervous glances. Some avoided eye contact entirely. Most of them had witnessed Monique firsthand. She was not someone who could be easily manipulated or intimidated. One particularly ambitious business associate, Vincent, spoke up hesitantly. "Derrick, with all due respect, trying to attack her publicly could backfire. People are already supporting her. If you act rashly, you risk escalating this, socially and legally." Derrick's face turned red, veins standing out on his neck. "Do you think I care about their support? I built this empire. I am in control. That woman is a threat to my reputation and my authority, and I will not be undermined in front of my peers." While Derrick raged, Monique had already moved several steps ahead. She was not waiting for him to make mistakes. She reached out discreetly to key influencers, journalists, and former associates, subtly reminding them of her achievements, philanthropy, and contributions to the community. Her approach was calm, precise, and impossible to attack without exposing Derrick further. She also prepared for the inevitable confrontation. She knew Derrick would attempt to regain the upper hand, likely through manipulation, intimidation, or public spectacle. She studied every detail of the Albright empire, every ally, and every vulnerability. Every move she made was calculated to protect herself while exposing Derrick's arrogance and cruelty. Meanwhile, Derrick's attempts to contain the damage were chaotic. His team scrambled to control the narrative, reaching out to media contacts, instructing them to remove or downplay videos of Monique's appearance. But the digital world was faster than they could manage. Screenshots, clips, and commentaries spread like wildfire, and the very audiences Derrick hoped to impress were instead championing Monique's courage. The tension escalated further when Derrick decided to confront Monique directly. He arrived at her apartment unannounced, his expression a mixture of anger, disbelief, and desperation. "Monique," he began, voice low and controlled, but the tremor in his hand betrayed him, "this has gone far enough. I don't know what your intentions are, but you need to step back before things get complicated." Monique, seated at her kitchen table, looked up calmly. Her posture was straight, her expression serene yet unwavering. "Derrick, I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to reclaim what you tried to take from me, my dignity, my power, my voice. And if you try to stop me, the world will see exactly who you really are." Derrick's jaw tightened. He had underestimated her yet again. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You think you've won? You've only just started. I built everything you see. I can destroy anyone who threatens me." Monique's eyes met his without flinching. "You built your empire on wealth and manipulation. I've built mine on integrity, skill, and resilience. And when the world compares the two, there's only one truth. You may have money, Derrick, but I have power you'll never understand." The confrontation ended without physical violence, but the intensity lingered like a charged storm. Derrick left, furious but forced to retreat, realizing that any rash action would only amplify Monique's influence. In the following weeks, the tension only grew. Derrick attempted several strategies to regain his dominance: subtle smear campaigns, whisper networks, and attempts to undermine Monique's credibility. But each effort backfired spectacularly. Monique's calm, dignified response and her growing circle of allies turned every attack into a public lesson on courage and self-respect. At the same time, Monique began mentoring young professionals and activists, using her story to inspire others. Each public appearance, each interview, each lecture subtly reinforced her narrative, that resilience, intelligence, and moral courage could outshine wealth and social standing. Derrick, increasingly desperate, began to unravel. His social circle started questioning his judgment. His business decisions, once seen as brilliant, were now scrutinized and doubted. Monique's presence, her influence, and her moral authority became a mirror reflecting the cracks in his carefully constructed world. The climax of Part 3 approached at a major gala organized by Derrick's father, a charity event meant to bolster the family's public image. Derrick planned to use it to reassert control, to demonstrate dominance over Monique and silence her influence once and for all. Monique, of course, anticipated his plan. She attended the gala not to provoke, but to observe, gather intelligence, and assert her presence subtly yet undeniably. As she entered the grand ballroom, the murmurs began again. Cameras turned. Social media notifications exploded. Monique's calm confidence set the tone for the entire evening. Derrick noticed immediately. He tried to maintain composure, but every guest, every journalist, every influencer in the room was acutely aware of her presence. She didn't need to speak, she was the story. And then it happened, the pivotal moment that would leave the audience stunned. Derrick attempted a public confrontation during the gala's speech. He approached Monique, intending to assert dominance. But as he began, a wave of whispers, subtle side glances, and a few pointed interruptions from influential attendees cut him off. Every word he uttered seemed hollow, every gesture exaggerated, and every attempt to intimidate her backfired spectacularly. Monique responded with calm authority, addressing the room with measured words about integrity, resilience, and the true meaning of influence. Her message resonated deeply with the audience, drawing admiration from unexpected corners, including key figures Derrick had long assumed were loyal to him. By the end of the night, Derrick's public image had suffered another blow. Monique, on the other hand, had solidified her reputation not only as a survivor but as a strategist, a leader, and a moral authority. The cliffhanger for Part 4 was simple yet devastating. Derrick, humiliated and desperate, would soon confront the reality that power without integrity is hollow, and that Monique's rise was unstoppable. How far would he go? And could Monique maintain her momentum without compromising her values? The story was approaching its ultimate reckoning, a conclusion that would not only resolve the tension between Derrick and Monique but also deliver a powerful message about justice, resilience, and the transformative power of dignity. The morning after the gala, the Albright estate was cloaked in uneasy silence. Derrick Albright sat in his father's study, replaying the events of the previous night like a broken record. Every misstep, every whispered comment, every admiring glance directed toward Monique haunted him. For a man whose life had been built on control, wealth, and intimidation, this loss of authority was unbearable. His empire, once a symbol of power, now felt fragile and vulnerable. Each passing day that Monique's influence grew only served as a reminder that no amount of money could buy dignity, respect, or moral authority. Vanessa, his bride, attempted to comfort him, but her own fear and insecurity were apparent. She had married a man she believed could dominate every room, command every audience, and silence every rival. But now she realized that the illusion had shattered. Derrick's arrogance, once magnetic, now seemed fragile and desperate. Monique, meanwhile, had returned to her apartment with a quiet confidence that radiated strength. She knew the power of patience, the influence of strategy, and the weight of dignity. Sitting at her desk, she organized the steps that would complete her victory, not through revenge, but through integrity and intelligence. Her first move was public perception. Monique understood that in a world dominated by social media, perception was reality. She carefully crafted a series of posts, interviews, and appearances that highlighted her resilience, her achievements, and her role in mentoring others. She framed her narrative not as a vendetta against Derrick but as a story of empowerment, justice, and leadership. The media frenzy continued. Every attempt by Derrick to undermine her was met with calm, poised responses that exposed his desperation. Where he had tried to manipulate, she had educated. Where he had tried to intimidate, she had inspired. And as the world watched, the contrast between them became undeniable. Derrick's business associates began to whisper. Former friends questioned their loyalties. Even his father, who had long valued wealth above all else, began to see the cracks in his son's character. Derrick's hubris, once admired, was now his greatest vulnerability. The tipping point came during a high-profile charity auction, a prestigious event that Derrick had intended to use as a stage to reassert his dominance. The ballroom was packed with socialites, philanthropists, and influential media figures. Derrick planned to showcase a lavish donation, publicly asserting his control and power. Monique, aware of his intentions, arrived with a team of young professionals and community leaders whose achievements spoke for themselves. Their presence was subtle but powerful, a living testament to her influence and the respect she commanded. When Derrick attempted to begin his speech, a ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. Every time he opened his mouth, Monique's network subtly countered, asking insightful questions, highlighting charitable contributions, and drawing attention to her mentorship programs. Derrick's words began to falter, his carefully prepared speech crumbling under the weight of intelligent opposition. Monique finally spoke, not in confrontation, but in a tone that commanded attention and respect. She addressed the audience directly, weaving a narrative of resilience, leadership, and integrity. She spoke of the importance of supporting those who uplift others, the power of education and mentorship, and the transformative effect of moral courage. Every word resonated with truth, inspiring applause and admiration from every corner of the room. Derrick's humiliation was complete. Every attempt to assert authority backfired spectacularly. His new bride, Vanessa, watched in stunned silence as the man she had married seemed smaller, weaker, and defeated in the very arena he had once dominated. The aftermath was swift. Social media erupted with praise for Monique's eloquence, poise, and vision. Influencers and journalists highlighted her leadership, her intelligence, and her ability to turn adversity into triumph. Derrick's reputation, once untouchable, was tarnished. The public no longer saw him as a powerful magnate but as a man unable to manage his own ego or respect others. But Monique's victory was not only public, it was deeply personal. She had confronted the man who once tried to humiliate her and emerged stronger, wiser, and more respected. She had demonstrated that true power comes not from wealth or intimidation, but from integrity, resilience, and moral courage. At home, she reflected on her journey. Every insult, every attempt at humiliation, and every challenge had strengthened her. She realized that her growth had been as much about self-discovery as it had been about confronting Derrick. She had reclaimed her dignity, built new alliances, and inspired countless others in the process. Meanwhile, Derrick faced the consequences of his arrogance. Business deals faltered as partners questioned his judgment. Social connections weakened as friends and associates aligned themselves with Monique's rising influence. Even within his own family, whispers of disappointment and frustration circulated. The empire he had built on dominance and control was no longer immune to scrutiny or public opinion. In a private confrontation with his father, Derrick attempted to justify his actions, to explain away his failures. But his father's eyes were cold and discerning. "Son," he said, "power is nothing without respect. Wealth is hollow if you cannot uphold integrity. Monique has something you will never fully grasp, she has authority that comes from truth, not money. And that is why she has won where you have failed." Derrick, faced with this reality, felt the full weight of his defeat. He had learned, too late, that intimidation and ego could never replace wisdom, moral strength, or respect. Monique, however, moved forward unscathed. She expanded her mentorship programs, increased her influence in the community, and became a symbol of empowerment for countless young professionals and leaders. Her story spread beyond the local scene, becoming a national example of how resilience, intelligence, and dignity can overcome adversity, challenge privilege, and inspire change. Her final act of triumph was subtle but profound. She publicly acknowledged Derrick's role in her journey, not as a villain to hate, but as a catalyst for her growth. By doing so, she reinforced her narrative of moral authority, showing that true victory lies not in revenge, but in rising above humiliation with grace and integrity. The story of Derrick and Monique reached its conclusion not with vengeance, but with transformation. Derrick remained wealthy, but his influence was diminished. Monique, meanwhile, had achieved a victory that no amount of money could buy, the triumph of character, strategy, and moral courage. Monique stood on a stage at a national leadership conference, addressing an audience of thousands. She spoke of her journey, the challenges she had faced, and the lessons she had learned. Every word was met with applause. Every story of triumph inspired a new wave of leaders and changemakers. And as she looked out at the crowd, Monique understood the full impact of her journey. She had reclaimed her dignity, reshaped public perception, and turned adversity into empowerment, not just for herself, but for everyone who had witnessed her courage. The story closed on a note of empowerment and hope, a testament to the transformative power of integrity, resilience, and unwavering moral strength. Monique's journey proved that no amount of wealth, status, or intimidation could suppress truth, courage, or the human spirit. Like, share and subscribe to our channel Echoes of Black Struggles.